Pirates managed to survive months at sea without refrigeration, while most people today struggle to keep food fresh for a week. They relied on 7 weird preservation tricks that seem unlikely, but surprisingly outdo many modern approaches. The wildest part? You likely already have everything you need for these methods right in your kitchen. The first technique might sound utterly revolting, but it works like a charm. After cooking, they let the fat cool and harden around the meat. The solid fat then acted like a natural seal, blocking out air and helping preserve it. Without air, there was no bacteria. Without bacteria, the meat stayed fresh for weeks. Rather than spoiling in hours under the hot Caribbean sun, fat served as a natural, edible version of plastic wrap, much tastier, too. It formed a sealed barrier that kept the meat safe much better than any modern container ever could. Pirates pretty much pioneered gourmet preservation cooking, but theirs relied on much more lard and way fewer spotless aprons. This approach worked particularly well with pork. It was a common practice on ships since they ate leftovers and it didn't take up much room. When a pig was slaughtered, every part was used. The meat was cooked and then buried in its own rendered fat, like a tasty little time capsule. The fat itself turned into food. When pirates eventually uncovered their preserved meat, they could use that fat for cooking other dishes. It was like a bonus meal tucked inside the main one. Still, the process took patience. You couldn't just slather fat on meat and call it preserved first, the meat had to be cooked all the way through. Any undercooked spots would spoil everything and ruin the entire batch. Hurrying the process would result in spoiled meat drifting in oil. This method was most effective in cooler environments. In tropical seas, even the fat would begin to liquefy and fail to preserve. Wise pirates would plan their food storage according to weather and their routes. Besides, it was better than resorting to eating rope when supplies were critically low. That fat also served an unexpected secondary purpose. It could serve as a remedy for wounds or as a waterproof coating for gear. Pirates found that pig fat was like the Swiss Army knife of ship supplies. Even the best preservation techniques had their limits, so another key survival tactic involved using entirely different ingredients. Ship biscuits combined with beans, peas, and lentils transformed hard, inedible stones into real food. These weren't the soft, buttery biscuits you'd see at a southern dinner. They were tough, dry, and could probably serve as weapons if needed. Pirates found a way to turn these hard, unappealing treats into satisfying meals. Dried legumes made all the difference. Beans, peas, and lentils could stay good for over a year when stored properly in barrels or sacks. They didn't require any special care, elaborate preservation methods, or ideal weather. Just keeping them dry was enough to make them outlast nearly all other onboard provisions. These small morsels acted like edible insurance for survival, and they actually tasted pretty good. Unlike ship biscuits that only offered calories, legumes supplied protein, fiber, and vital nutrients that kept pirates physically intact. Getting ready was simple. Pirates typically tossed in handfuls of dried beans or peas into their stew. The legumes soaked up the salty meat's flavor and made the dish more filling, turning what was often just watery broth with some leftover bits into a hearty meal. Lentils, in particular, were prized since they cooked quicker than most other legumes. When facing limited fuel and choppy weather, every second counted in the kitchen. Red lentils could be cooked in less than half an hour, but beans might take hours. Quick cooking was essential when you're trying to prepare dinner as your kitchen swings like a carnival ride. These weren't just about stretching meals, they also played a vital mental role. Consuming salted pork and hardtack daily could wear down a crew's morale quicker than any enemy assault. A small handful of chickpeas might do more to prevent issues than a cannon loaded with firepower. Various legumes brought distinct benefits. Black beans kept their form in stews and added deep flavor, while split peas could be mashed into hearty porridge that kept everyone full. When times were tough and creativity was needed, chickpeas sometimes ended up ground into flour. Long before anyone had heard of quinoa, they were already being embraced by health-conscious folks. Clever pirates would swap different types of chickpeas at various ports, slowly building a diverse stash that kept their diets interesting. Dependable food supplies couldn't fix every health issue pirates encountered, especially one disease that demanded a totally different strategy. Growing seeds on their ships turned pirates into unlikely farmers in the open sea. Not because they suddenly became expert gardeners, but because they were desperate to steer clear of a terrifying illness that could wipe them out more quickly than a fight with swords. Scurvy was every pirate's nightmare. It caused your gums to bleed, your teeth to fall out, and even reopen old wounds. Trying to appear tough when your teeth were literally falling apart wasn't exactly the fearsome pirate look most crews wanted. The root cause was a lack of vitamin C, though pirates didn't really know the science behind it. Fresh citrus was perfect, but it didn't last long on those long journeys. Smart pirates found a way to grow fresh food aboard their ships, using just seeds, damp cloth, and a bit of patience. They realized that sprouting beans and grains could supply the vitamin C they so badly needed. Turns out, it was a surprisingly straightforward process. Grab some dried beans, peas, or grain seeds, and wrap them in a damp cloth. Find a quiet, dark spot on the ship where they won't get disturbed. Wait a few days. Before you know it, fresh green sprouts will be pushing through, like magic, something that can keep you alive. But these sprouts weren't a full meal by themselves, they were tiny, stringy, and hardly satisfying. They held concentrated nutrients that could keep a crew healthy when no fresh food was around. Just a small handful of sprouts every few days might be enough to ensure the crew stayed healthy upon reaching port, rather than arriving with only 6 sailors left. The sprouting process needed precise control of moisture. If too dry, the seeds wouldn't sprout; if too wet, they'd rot instead of growing. It felt like farming, but your farm was just the size of a dinner plate floating on water. Different seeds sprouted at various speeds and offered different benefits. Bean sprouts appeared in 3 to 5 days and gave decent vitamin C. Grain sprouts took longer but offered more variety in flavor and texture. When everything else on the ship was either salted, dried, or dubious, these tiny green sprigs felt like discovering self-growing treasure. The timing had to be just right. Plant them too soon, and they'd become overgrown and bitter. Wait too long, and you'd risk scurvy symptoms before the sprouts were ready. Sprouting wasn't the only method pirates used to turn simple supplies into new choices, particularly when they found creative ways to use fire. When food on board or during stops, pirates became experts at preserving, able to make even the toughest fish taste okay. This wasn't about tobacco pipes. Pirates transformed smoke into an incredible way to preserve food, allowing them to stretch their supplies for weeks and adding flavors that made their meals much more enjoyable. During port visits or raids ashore, they fashioned makeshift smokehouses from whatever materials were at hand, like a few wooden planks, some rope, and a fire pit, creating setups capable of preserving enough food to get them through the next part of their voyage. Smoking was akin to a magical culinary device fueled by patience and wood. The process demanded steady focus and the right kind of timber. Various woods yielded distinct flavors and preservation benefits. Hardwoods like oak and hickory were favored because they burned slowly, giving off consistent, rich smoke. The science of smoking was pretty clever, even if pirates had no idea why it was effective. Smoke has natural chemicals that kill bacteria and slow down spoilage. The heat dries out the food, making it tougher for dangerous microbes to thrive. Fish were typically smoked the most since they were easy to catch and tended to spoil fast in warm tropical climates. Null, roll, assistant. Pirates had to keep their fires at certain temperatures for hours, tweaking them according to the weather. It was like slow cooking a barbecue while being chased by folks who definitely weren't on the guest list. Clever pirates created portable smoking boxes they could use on their ship decks whenever the weather cooperated. Well-smoked fish can stay good for 3 to 4 weeks under typical conditions. The smoking process amplifies the flavors, often making preserved fish more appealing than other ways of preservation. Additionally, smoked fish had the bonus of deterring seagulls from stealing it. In some coastal communities, particularly valuable smoked fish was even used as a form of currency. What started as a way to avoid starvation unexpectedly turned into gourmet food production. Smoking wasn't the only method pirates used to harness natural processes for preserving food, particularly vegetables. Fermented foods like sauerkraut or salted cabbage might seem like punishment fare, but for pirates out at sea, those weren't your ordinary pickled vegetables. Fermentation is a whole different process that produces foods rich in natural probiotics and helps preserve them for months without spoiling. It works by friendly bacteria feeding on the sugars in the cabbage and generating acids that stop bad bacteria from taking hold. Fermentation was like a tiny security squad constantly on duty to prevent harmful bacteria from contaminating your food. The process produced such a salty, acidic environment that harmful bacteria couldn't live, while the good bacteria flourished and multiplied. To prepare fresh cabbage, it had to be shredded and combined with salt in just the right amounts. Just a small amount of salt and harmful bacteria could dominate. Too much salt, and the fermentation wouldn't kick off correctly. The mixture was then packed tightly into barrels to keep out air and let fermentation happen. Fermentation was key to success. It needed to begin at the right temperature and be left to proceed for several weeks. It demanded more patience than most pirates had, but the outcome made every moment of waiting worthwhile. The flavor was admittedly tough for today's tastes. Fermented cabbage was tangy, funky, and carried a powerful aroma that could clear a space. For pirates enduring months of salted meat and hardtack, it offered a vital break in variety and a boost of nutrition. For example, pirates gathered fermentation recipes just as other folks collected maps to hidden treasure. Each region had its own fermentation customs that pirates learned to adapt to. Northern European crews brought their knowledge of making sauerkraut, while others had experience with fermented vegetables from their hometowns. The probiotic boosted digestive health, essential for crews surviving on repetitive diets for months. The vitamin levels helped avoid deficiency illnesses that could weaken whole crews. It was like a mix of pharmacy and grocery store in a single barrel, smelly, but incredibly effective. The tangy, layered flavors offered a sensory change that helped avoid the boredom often caused by ship rations, which could lead to dissatisfaction and even trouble. Tasting something entirely different from the usual ship fare was like discovering a tiny piece of home drifting in the saltwater. Pairing foods wasn't the only unusual preservation technique pirates came across, especially when they had access to rare and precious ingredients. Honey as a preservative was the height of luxury, a privilege only the richest pirates could afford. When it was available, honey outperformed nearly every other preservation method sailors had at their disposal in that time. The science behind honey preservation was astonishing. Even without understanding the chemistry, pirates knew honey creates conditions in which bacteria simply can't thrive. Thanks to its low moisture and natural acidity, harmful microbes can't thrive. Honey essentially was nature's ideal safe food, and it also tasted fantastic. This way of preservation wasn't just about preventing spoilage, it could actually enhance the flavor and nutritional benefits of stored foods. Fruits, nuts, and herbs kept in honey kept their natural flavor while absorbing a rich, intricate sweetness that made them more enticing than other preserved options. Using honey as a preservative was like putting food into a state of suspension. When stored correctly in honey, these items could stay tasty and safe to eat for years, not just months. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient foods preserved with honey that stayed edible for thousands of years. Because of its cost, using honey for preservation was a rare treat. Honey was pricey and hard to acquire in large enough amounts for serious food storage. Relying on honey for preservation was like wrapping your meal in gold coins. Various kinds of honey offered distinct preservation abilities and flavors. Darker honey had stronger antimicrobial effects but could overshadow subtle tastes. Lighter honey worked better for preserving fruits and herbs when maintaining the original flavor was key. It was like having one magical preservative that could handle everything from medicine to desserts. Honey had many uses beyond just preserving food. It could be applied as medicine for wounds, sore throats, and digestion troubles. It offered a quick energy boost in emergencies and could be combined with water to make a refreshing beverage. Foods preserved with honey didn't require strict temperature control or protection from moisture. Honey could withstand the harsh conditions of ship storage far better than almost any other preserved food. Its durability made preserving honey extremely worthwhile, even with its high price. Having access to sweet, flavorful food could lift spirits more effectively than discovering real treasure. These items offered familiar tastes and textures that reminded crews of home and brighter days. Even the best preservation techniques couldn't fix all the food storage issues pirates encountered, which sometimes led to surprisingly straightforward fixes. One such emergency solution was wrapping food in vinegar-soaked cloths. It was simple, inexpensive, and unexpectedly effective at tackling problems that more costly methods couldn't resolve. This approach wasn't designed for long-term preservation like some other methods. Instead, it provided precious extra days when food was just about to spoil. Basically, it gave the food a brief extension of life, which could be the difference between eating and going hungry. It worked because vinegar creates an acidic environment that slows down bacteria and repels insects. Wrapping bread, cheese, or dried meat in vinegar-dampened cloths could help keep them edible for a few extra days. For pirates facing quick spoilage in tropical heat, those extra days could be a game-changer. The cloths had to be damp with vinegar but not so soaked that they dripped. Using too much vinegar would ruin the flavor of the food. Too little wouldn't offer enough protection. Striking the perfect balance was like an art, using only the simplest ingredients. Different foods reacted uniquely to vinegar wraps. Bread, for instance, stayed fresher and mold-free longer when wrapped correctly. The cheese kept its texture better and didn't turn slimy, which would have signaled spoilage. The dried meat remained tastier and was less likely to draw in insects. The vinegar used wasn't always the polished variety we're familiar with now. Pirates often used whatever acidic liquid they had on hand, like wine vinegar, fruit vinegar, or even diluted alcohol that had become acidic. When survival was at stake, they didn't fuss over brand names. Nearly any crew could get vinegar and cloth, unlike costly preservation techniques needing special ingredients or gear. It was a straightforward, democratic way to preserve, accessible to both the poorest pirates and the wealthiest captains alike. Pirates had to become skilled at spotting the early signs that food was spoiling. The timing of using vinegar wrap was key. It worked best on food that was still fresh but beginning to deterioration. Having a way to save food that might otherwise be thrown away gave crew members hope and a feeling of control over their food supply. It showed that, at times, the simplest answers turned out to be the most dependable when everything else fell apart. In northern waters, these sour vegetables were like liquid gold, able to stave off death and keep the crews running during the longest journeys.